If you're watching this, hit that like button now, because what you're about to discover changed tank warfare forever, and most people have no idea this even happened. June 23, 1941, the second day of Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. German panzer crews are rolling through Soviet territory, crushing outdated T-26 tanks like tin cans, when suddenly a massive green monster appears on the ridgeline. The commander orders fire. The gunner aims perfectly. Boom! The round strikes the turret and bounces off like a rubber ball. Another shot. Another ricochet. Panic sets in. The Soviet tank rotates its turret, aims, and fires once. The German Panzer III explodes into flames. This happened thousands of times in the summer of 1941, and it terrified the German army so badly they had to rewrite their entire tank doctrine. Comment below. Did you know the T-34 was invincible in 1941? Drop a fire if this story shocked you, and subscribe because I'm revealing the exact math that proved German tanks stood no chance against Soviet armor. Stats that military historians tried to bury for decades. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa begins as 3 million German soldiers crash across the Soviet border in the largest invasion in human history. Panzer divisions equipped with Mark IIIs and Mark IVs lead the charge, their commanders confident they'll face the same obsolete Soviet tanks they'd studied in intelligence reports. The slow, lightly armored T-26s and BT series that belonged in museums, not battlefields. The German High Command has assured them Soviet industry is primitive, Soviet tactics are suicidal, and this campaign will end before winter arrives. By dawn on June 23rd, that confidence shatters like glass. Oberlieutenant Hans Becker commands a platoon of Panzer IIIs with the 1st Panzer Division, spearheading the drive toward Minsk. His tank mounts a 50mm KWK-38 gun, the newest, most powerful weapon Germany has installed in its medium tanks. Intelligence briefings promised this gun could penetrate any Soviet armor at combat ranges. Becker's crew has trained for months, mastering the tactics that crushed Poland and France. They're the elite of the Wehrmacht's armored force, and they know it. Then they crest a hill overlooking a narrow valley, and Becker sees something that makes his blood freeze. Rolling toward them through the morning mist is a Soviet tank unlike anything in the recognition manuals. It's massive, with a hull that slopes at radical angles instead of the vertical plates German tanks use. The turret is larger than any light tank should carry, mounting what looks like a naval gun. And it's moving fast, faster than any tank Becker has ever seen, its wide tracks eating up ground that would bog down a Panzer III. Becker screams into his radio, "Unknown enemy tank 800 meters." His gunner acquires the target, centers the crosshairs on the slope front armor, and fires. Through his periscope, Becker watches the tracer streak across the valley and strike the Soviet tank dead center. The round hits and ricochets into the sky at a 45-degree angle, leaving nothing but a bright scar on the armor plate. His gunner fires again. Another ricochet. Then another. The Soviet tank doesn't even slow down. Now the Soviet turret rotates with mechanical precision. The long barrel of the 76.2mm gun swings toward Becker's position. One shot. A single, thunderous boom that echoes across the valley. Becker's wingman, a Panzer III commanded by his best friend from training, erupts in a fireball so bright it hurts to look at. The explosion sends the turret spinning through the air like a child's toy. 3 more shots in rapid succession, and 3 more German tanks are burning hulks. Becker's driver throws the Panzer III into reverse, backing desperately down the hillside as 50mm rounds continue bouncing harmlessly off the Soviet monster. The radio erupts with panicked voices as other platoons report the same nightmare. Unidentified Soviet tanks that their weapons cannot penetrate, that move like cavalry but hit like battleships.
that are slaughtering German armor at ranges where German tanks can't even score effective hits. By nightfall on June 23rd, German intelligence officers are collecting after-action reports that read like horror stories. The unknown Soviet tank is appearing across the entire invasion front. It's not a prototype or a handful of experimental vehicles. There are hundreds of them, possibly thousands, and the German army has absolutely no doctrine, no tactics, and no weapons capable of stopping them at range. What the Germans have encountered is the T-34, a Soviet medium tank that will change the face of armored warfare forever. And in June 1941, it's virtually invincible.
The T-34's revolutionary design begins with a single principle that Soviet engineers understood, but German designers had dismissed: slope. Instead of vertical armor plates that absorb hits at 90-degree angles, the T-34's hull slopes at 60 degrees from vertical. This seemingly simple change creates a geometric advantage that multiplies armor effectiveness by a factor of 2. Here's the math that terrified German commanders when they finally figured it out. The T-34's front hull armor is 45 millimeters thick, not particularly impressive by 1941 standards. But because it's sloped at 60 degrees, an incoming shell must penetrate not 45 millimeters of steel, but the effective equivalent of 90 millimeters. A German 37mm anti-tank gun firing armor-piercing rounds can penetrate about 40 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. Against the T-34's sloped armor, that penetration drops to effectively 0. The rounds literally bounce off like ping-pong balls. Even the newer 50mm guns on Panzer IIIs can only penetrate about 60 millimeters of vertical armor at close range. Against the T-34's effective 90mm protection, they're almost useless unless firing at point-blank range into the side armor. And getting close enough for a side shot means exposing yourself to the T-34's 76.2mm gun, which is a death sentence. The 76.2mm F-34 gun mounted on the T-34 represents the other half of the nightmare equation. This weapon fires a 6.5-kilogram armor-piercing shell at 662 meters per second, generating enough kinetic energy to penetrate 69 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. And that's at angle. At 500 meters, the T-34 can punch through the front armor of every German tank in service. The Panzer III's 30mm front plate might as well be cardboard, and the Panzer IV's 50mm armor provides no protection whatsoever. The tactical reality becomes clear within days. German tanks must get within 100 meters to have any chance of penetrating a T-34, while the T-34 can kill German tanks from 500-plus meters away. This 5-to-1 range advantage means T-34s can sit in hold-down positions and systematically destroy German armor before the Germans even get close enough to return effective fire. But the terror doesn't end with armor and guns. The T-34's mobility shatters every assumption German planners made about Soviet capabilities. The tank's 500-horsepower V2 diesel engine, a technological achievement German intelligence insisted the Soviets couldn't produce, gives the 26-ton tank a top speed of 53 kilometers per hour on roads. More importantly, its wide 500mm tracks distribute weight so efficiently that the T-34 can traverse mud, snow, and soft ground where German tanks with their narrow tracks simply bog down and become stationary targets. German tank crews begin reporting incidents that sound impossible. T-34s flanking entire panzer columns by driving through swamps that German maps mark as impassable. T-34s climbing hills that Panzer IIIs can't even attempt. T-34s pursuing retreating German forces through forests where the narrow German tracks dig into soft earth and trap the tanks like insects in amber. Hauptmann Friedrich Steinhoff, commanding a company of Panzer IVs with the 7th Panzer Division, writes in his combat diary on July 8th, "We encountered 6 T-34s today. Our guns could not harm them. We hit one tank 17 times without effect. It destroyed 4 of my tanks before mechanical problems forced it to withdraw. The Russians don't need tactics. They just drive at us knowing we cannot stop them."
By late July, the psychological impact spreads through German armored formations like a virus. Tank crews who previously considered themselves the elite of the Wehrmacht now refuse to engage T-34s without infantry support, artillery preparation, or air cover. The German doctrine of aggressive armored warfare, the Blitzkrieg tactics that conquered Europe, grinds to a halt wherever T-34s appear. Panzer commanders request permission to retreat from enemy tanks, something unthinkable just months earlier. The desperation reaches the highest levels of German command. On July 25th, General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored doctrine and commander of Panzer Group II, sends an urgent message to Army High Command. The T-34 tank is superior to any armored vehicle currently in German service. We require immediate development of tanks with comparable armor and firepower, or we risk losing the armored superiority upon which our entire operational doctrine depends. That message triggers a crisis in Berlin. If Guderian, the man who invented modern tank warfare, admits German armor is outclassed, the implications are catastrophic. The entire invasion plan for Barbarossa assumes German technical and tactical superiority. The T-34 proves that assumption is a deadly lie.
The T-34's revolutionary design begins with a single principle that Soviet engineers understood, but German designers had dismissed: slope. Instead of vertical armor plates that absorb hits at 90-degree angles, the T-34's hull slopes at 60 degrees from vertical. This seemingly simple change creates a geometric advantage that multiplies armor effectiveness by a factor of 2. Here's the math that terrified German commanders when they finally figured it out. The T-34's front hull armor is 45 millimeters thick, not particularly impressive by 1941 standards. But because it's sloped at 60 degrees, an incoming shell must penetrate not 45 millimeters of steel, but the effective equivalent of 90 millimeters. A German 37mm anti-tank gun firing armor-piercing rounds can penetrate about 40 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. Against the T-34's sloped armor, that penetration drops to effectively 0. The rounds literally bounce off like ping-pong balls. Even the newer 50mm guns on Panzer IIIs can only penetrate about 60 millimeters of vertical armor at close range. Against the T-34's effective 90mm protection, they're almost useless unless firing at point-blank range into the side armor. And getting close enough for a side shot means exposing yourself to the T-34's 76.2mm gun, which is a death sentence. The 76.2mm F-34 gun mounted on the T-34 represents the other half of the nightmare equation. This weapon fires a 6.5-kilogram armor-piercing shell at 662 meters per second, generating enough kinetic energy to penetrate 69 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. And that's at angle. At 500 meters, the T-34 can punch through the front armor of every German tank in service. The Panzer III's 30mm front plate might as well be cardboard, and the Panzer IV's 50mm armor provides no protection whatsoever. The tactical reality becomes clear within days. German tanks must get within 100 meters to have any chance of penetrating a T-34, while the T-34 can kill German tanks from 500-plus meters away. This 5-to-1 range advantage means T-34s can sit in hold-down positions and systematically destroy German armor before the Germans even get close enough to return effective fire. But the terror doesn't end with armor and guns. The T-34's mobility shatters every assumption German planners made about Soviet capabilities. The tank's 500-horsepower V2 diesel engine, a technological achievement German intelligence insisted the Soviets couldn't produce, gives the 26-ton tank a top speed of 53 kilometers per hour on roads. More importantly, its wide 500mm tracks distribute weight so efficiently that the T-34 can traverse mud, snow, and soft ground, where German tanks with their narrow tracks simply bog down and become stationary targets. German tank crews begin reporting incidents that sound impossible. T-34s flanking entire panzer columns by driving through swamps that German maps mark as impassable. T-34s climbing hills that Panzer IIIs can't even attempt.
T-34s pursuing retreating German forces through forests, where the narrow German tracks dig into soft earth and trap the tanks like insects in amber. Hauptmann Friedrich Steinhoff, commanding a company of Panzer IVs with the 7th Panzer Division, writes in his combat diary on July 8th, "We encountered 6 T-34s today. Our guns could not harm them. We hit one tank 17 times without effect. It destroyed 4 of my tanks before mechanical problems forced it to withdraw. The Russians don't need tactics. They just drive at us knowing we cannot stop them." By late July, the psychological impact spreads through German armored formations like a virus. Tank crews who previously considered themselves the elite of the Wehrmacht now refuse to engage T-34s without infantry support, artillery preparation, or air cover. The German doctrine of aggressive armored warfare, the Blitzkrieg tactics that conquered Europe, grinds to a halt wherever T-34s appear. Panzer commanders request permission to retreat from enemy tanks, something unthinkable just months earlier. The desperation reaches the highest levels of German command. On July 25th, General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored doctrine and commander of Panzer Group II, sends an urgent message to Army High Command. The T-34 tank is superior to any armored vehicle currently in German service. We require immediate development of tanks with comparable armor and firepower, or we risk losing the armored superiority upon which our entire operational doctrine depends. That message triggers a crisis in Berlin. If Guderian, the man who invented modern tank warfare, admits German armor is outclassed, the implications are catastrophic. The entire invasion plan for Barbarossa assumes German technical and tactical superiority. The T-34 proves that assumption is a deadly lie.
The German Army's standard anti-tank weapon in 1941 is the 3.7-centimeter Pak-36, a gun designed in the mid-1930s to fight tanks that no longer exist. Infantry units carry these weapons as their primary defense against armor, training on the doctrine that concentrated anti-tank fire can stop any enemy tank advance. Then they meet the T-34, and that doctrine dies screaming. Lieutenant Otto Carius, a veteran anti-tank gunner who will later become one of Germany's most decorated tank commanders, describes the first time his unit engaged T-34s near Raseiniai, Lithuania. "We opened fire at 700 meters, the maximum effective range of our guns. The T-34s didn't even notice. They kept driving straight at us. At 500 meters, we were scoring direct hits, but the rounds bounced off like we were throwing stones. At 200 meters, point-blank range, we finally penetrated the side armor of one tank. But by then, 3 of our gun positions had been overrun and destroyed. The survivors abandoned their guns and retreated. What else could they do? You can't fight a tank with weapons that don't work." German infantry formations across the Eastern Front report the same horrifying pattern. Anti-tank guns that were supposed to be their shield against armor are useless against T-34s except at suicidal ranges. The Pak-36 earns a bitter nickname among German soldiers, Panzer Anknopfgerät, the tank door knocker, because all it does is announce your presence before the T-34 kills you. Even the newer 5-centimeter Pak-38 gun, rushed into service specifically to deal with heavier Allied tanks, struggles against the T-34. It can penetrate at close range, but close range against a tank moving 50 kilometers per hour means you get one shot, maybe 2 before the T-34 is on top of your position. German gun crews start taking casualties at rates that exceed infantry losses. Anti-tank units, supposed to be rear echelon forces, suffer frontline mortality because the only way to stop a T-34 with a Pak-38 is to let it get close enough to kill you with machine guns while you're trying to line up the killing shot. The German army discovers exactly one weapon that reliably stops T-34s, the 8.8-centimeter Flak gun. This massive anti-aircraft weapon, designed to shoot down bombers at high altitude, fires an 8-kilogram shell with enough velocity to punch through the T-34's sloped armor like tissue paper. The 88 can kill T-34s at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters, safely beyond the distance where the T-34 can return effective fire. But there's a problem. There aren't enough 88s to go around, they're desperately needed for air defense, they're difficult to move quickly, and using strategic air defense weapons to fight tanks represents a catastrophic misallocation of resources. German commanders face an impossible choice: redeploy 88mm flak guns from protecting cities and supply lines, leaving them vulnerable to Soviet air attack, or watch their tank formations get destroyed by an enemy they cannot fight. Most choose to redeploy the 88s. Soviet bombers immediately exploit the gaps in German air defense. Desperation produces tragic innovation. Infantry units start experimenting with close assault tactics, trying to get close enough to T-34s to attack with magnetic mines and satchel charges. The casualty rates are apocalyptic. A single T-34 can kill a dozen infantry before they get within throwing range. The machine guns mounted on T-34s, a coaxial 7.62mm and a ball-mounted hull gun, sweep approaching soldiers like a scythe through wheat. Grenadier Klaus Weber, a combat engineer with the 6th Infantry Division, survives a close assault on a T-34 and describes the experience. 5 of us approached through a wheat field, while our anti-tank guns provided covering fire that did nothing. We got within 20 meters. Schmidt threw his magnetic mine, it stuck to the side armor. Before we could retreat, the tank's machine gun opened up. Schmidt and Hoffman died instantly. I was wounded. The mine exploded but only damaged the track. The T-34 crew just backed up, broke free of the damaged track section, and drove away. We sacrificed 3 men to accomplish nothing. By August, German intelligence compiles reports estimating Soviet T-34 strength across the invasion front. The numbers trigger panic. At least 1,200 T-34s are operational, with production continuing at factories the Germans cannot reach. The Wehrmacht has no comparable tank in service. The Panzer III's 50mm gun is inadequate. The Panzer IV's short-barreled 75mm is designed for infantry support, not anti-tank work. The heavy tanks that German designers planned to develop, the Tigers and Panthers of later years, are still on drawing boards. Hitler himself demands answers. On September 21st, he convenes a meeting with Germany's top tank designers and military commanders. The message is clear. Germany must either develop a tank superior to the T-34 or develop tactics to defeat it with existing equipment. Failure means losing the Eastern Front. The result is the Panzerkommission, a team of tank experts, military officers, and technical specialists dispatched to the front lines in November 1941 with a single mission: capture an intact T-34, analyze its design, and determine how to defeat it or copy it. The Commission's report, delivered in December, contains conclusions that shake the German military establishment. The T-34 is superior to all German tanks currently in service. Its armor protection, firepower, and mobility exceed our vehicles in every measurable category. Direct copying is impossible due to the specialized manufacturing techniques and materials the Soviets employ. Defeating the T-34 requires either the development of entirely new German tanks or tactical doctrines that avoid direct tank versus tank combat. That report essentially admits what frontline commanders already know. In June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union with tanks that were obsolete before the first shot was fired. The T-34 has rendered 3 years of German tank development worthless.
The T-34's technical superiority forces Germany into a technological arms race they're already losing. On November 25, 1941, the Waffenamt, Germany's weapons development department, receives orders to immediately begin development of a new medium tank incorporating three key features of the T-34. Sloped armor for maximum protection, a high-velocity long gun for armor penetration, and wide tracks for superior mobility. This program will eventually produce the Panther tank, but that weapon won't reach frontline units until 1943, 2 years away. In the meantime, German forces must fight the T-34 with equipment and tactics designed for a different war. The adaptations that emerge are born from desperation rather than doctrine. Panzer commanders start refusing to engage T-34s in open terrain, instead maneuvering to force encounters in villages and forests where superior German optics and crew training can compensate for inferior armor and firepower. They develop ambush tactics using carefully positioned 88mm guns supported by conventional tanks that serve as spotters rather than primary weapons. They request constant air support because Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers with 37mm cannons can penetrate T-34 top armor, one of the few vulnerable points. But these tactics work only when conditions are perfect, when German forces can choose the engagement, when air support is available, when ammunition stocks are sufficient. And they don't address the fundamental problem. Given equal conditions, a T-34 will kill a Panzer III or IV before the German tank can effectively return fire. That single fact reshapes the entire character of the Eastern Front. The psychological impact on German troops exceeds the tactical challenge. Soldiers who believed in German technical superiority, who were told they had the best equipment, the best training, the best tactics, now face an enemy tank they cannot defeat with standard weapons. The shock erodes confidence at every level. Tank crews who used to advance aggressively now hesitate, checking sight lines, calling for air reconnaissance, demanding infantry screens. The blitzkrieg spirit that powered German victories in Poland and France evaporates in the face of Soviet armor that simply won't die. Soviet commanders, despite the catastrophic losses of 1941's opening months, recognize the advantage the T-34 provides. Even though poor tactics, inadequate training, and logistical failures waste much of the T-34's potential during Barbarossa's first summer, the tank itself proves its worth in countless small actions where a single T-34 holds off entire German formations. Legends spread through the Red Army. The lone T-34 at Rosiani that fought for an entire day against an entire German division, or Dmitry Lavrino, whose T-34 crew destroyed 52 German tanks in 5 months of fighting. The arrival of winter 1941 compounds the T-34's advantages. The diesel engine that powers the tank starts reliably in temperatures that freeze the gasoline engines of German panzers. The wide tracks that provide cross-country mobility in summer glide across snow that bogs down narrow-tracked German tanks. As the Eastern Front stabilizes into the brutal stalemate of winter warfare, T-34s maintain operational mobility while German armor freezes into uselessness. General Guderian's diary entries from December 1941 reveal the depth of German concern. Our tank forces suffer not merely from winter conditions and supply difficulties, but from a fundamental inadequacy of equipment. The T-34 has proven superior in every engagement. Our crews are brave and skillful, but they cannot overcome the technical inferiority of their vehicles. We require new tanks immediately, or we will lose the armored superiority upon which all our operational planning depends. The political implications reach Berlin. Hitler, informed that Soviet tank production exceeds German output and that Soviet designs are superior, responds with characteristic denial. He orders increased production of existing German tanks rather than delaying for new designs. The result is that Germany continues building obsolete Panzer IIIs and IVs throughout 1942, even as every report from the Eastern Front demands vehicles capable of fighting T-34s on equal terms. By early 1942, German designers are working frantically on multiple projects, upgunning existing Panzer IVs with long-barreled 75mm cannons that can finally match the T-34's firepower, developing the new Panther medium tank that copies the T-34's sloped armor concept, and rushing production of the Tiger heavy tank that relies on thick armor and an 88mm gun to achieve superiority through brute force rather than elegant design.
These efforts will eventually restore some parity to the tank balance on the Eastern Front, but they come at immense cost. Resources that should have supported the invasion effort are diverted to emergency weapon development. Production schedules are disrupted as factories retool for new tank models. Most critically, the psychological damage is irreparable. German soldiers learn they can lose, that their equipment can be inferior, that Soviet industry can outproduce and outdesign the Reich. The T-34 doesn't single-handedly defeat Germany. The Eastern Front's outcome depends on countless factors, from logistics to leadership to the brutal mathematics of attrition warfare. But the T-34 does something equally important. It shatters the myth of German invincibility at exactly the moment when that myth matters most. In June 1941, German forces believed they were technologically superior to everyone. By December 1941, they know that's a lie. And once that psychological advantage disappears, the grinding reality of industrial warfare takes over.
The final accounting of the T-34's impact on Operation Barbarossa emerges from both German and Soviet archives, painting a picture of a weapon that changed warfare beyond its immediate tactical effects. Soviet factories produced approximately 3,000 T-34s in 1941 alone, and that production rate accelerated dramatically in 1942 as factories evacuated east of the Urals reached full capacity. By the war's end, over 57,000 T-34s rolled off Soviet production lines, more tanks than Germany produced of all types combined during the entire war. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The T-34's real legacy lies in forcing every major power to rethink tank design. The sloped armor principle that made the T-34 nearly invincible in 1941 became standard on every subsequent tank design, from the German Panther to the American M26 Pershing to the British Centurion. The T-34 proved that mobility, protection, and firepower must be balanced, that a medium tank with the right combination of features could outperform heavier, more expensive vehicles. German tank development after 1941 becomes a race to catch up to what the Soviets already achieved. The Panther, finally deployed in 1943, is explicitly designed to match the T-34's capabilities. Sloped armor providing equivalent protection to much thicker vertical plates, a high-velocity 75mm gun capable of defeating any Soviet tank at range, and wide tracks for cross-country mobility. German engineers studying captured T-34s are so impressed that they recommend direct copying, a suggestion rejected only because Germany lacks the specialized alloys and manufacturing techniques Soviet factories employ. The Tiger tank, deployed in late 1942, takes a different approach, brute force superiority through a massive 56-ton chassis mounting an 88mm gun and armor up to 100mm thick. The Tiger can defeat T-34s reliably, but at tremendous cost. Each Tiger requires resources to build 10 T-34s, breaks down frequently, and consumes fuel at rates that strain German logistics. The Tiger represents German industrial philosophy, quality over quantity. The T-34 represents the opposite, good enough quality produced in overwhelming numbers. The strategic implications of this philosophical divide determine the war's outcome on the Eastern Front. Germany fights with expensive, complex weapons that take months to produce and require extensive maintenance. The Soviet Union fights with simpler, more reliable weapons produced in quantities that overwhelm German capacity to destroy them. A German panzer division with 200 tanks represents an irreplaceable resource that takes a year to build and train. A Soviet tank corps with 200 T-34s can be replaced in weeks from factory output. Soviet tank commander Dmitry Lavrenenko, whose T-34 crew destroyed 52 German tanks before Lavrenenko's death in December 1941, wrote in a letter to his family, "Our tank is not perfect. The Germans have better optics, better radios, better crew comfort. But when my gun fires, German tanks die. When German guns fire at us, their shells bounce off. That is all that matters in war. Who is still alive when the shooting stops?" That brutal calculus defines the Eastern Front's tank warfare.
German crews might be better trained, German tactics might be more sophisticated, German optics might provide better targeting, but if German guns cannot penetrate Soviet armor at range, and Soviet guns can destroy German tanks from safe distances, training and tactics become secondary to the fundamental equation of firepower and protection. The Panzerkommission's final report, completed in December 1941, concludes with a statement that appears in bold text. The T-34 represents a paradigm shift in armored warfare. Germany has no tank in service or in development that matches its combination of firepower, protection, and mobility. This deficiency threatens the success of operations on the Eastern Front. Immediate action is required. That immediate action comes too late. By the time German factories begin producing Panthers and Tigers in significant numbers, Soviet industry is producing T-34s at rates exceeding German capacity to destroy them. The tank battles at Kursk in July 1943, the largest armored engagement in history, pit approximately 800 German tanks, including the newest Panthers and Tigers, against over 5,000 Soviet tanks, predominantly T-34s. Germany loses the battle not because their new tanks are inferior, but because they're outnumbered 6-1 and cannot sustain the attrition rate. For the German soldiers who encountered T-34s in June 1941, the shock of facing superior enemy equipment never fully fades. Veterans of the Eastern Front carry with them the memory of rounds bouncing off sloped armor, of watching entire platoons of panzers burn, of retreating from an enemy they could not stop with the weapons they'd been given. That psychological wound, the knowledge that German technical superiority was a myth, spreads through the Wehrmacht and never heals. The T-34 doesn't win the war by itself. Soviet victory on the Eastern Front depends on countless factors: the vast spaces that absorb German offensives, the brutal winter that favors defenders, the industrial capacity evacuated east of the Urals, the human cost the Soviet Union is willing to pay, the strategic errors of German leadership. But the T-34 provides the weapon that makes victory possible, a tank that matches or exceeds German armor while being simple enough to produce in overwhelming numbers. When the last shots are fired in May 1945, T-34s lead Soviet forces into Berlin. German designers, captured or evacuated to work for Western powers, carry with them the lessons learned from facing the T-34. Post-war tank development, from the M48 patent to the Leopard 1 to the T-54, incorporates the principles the T-34 demonstrated: sloped armor, high-velocity guns, and mobility balanced with protection. The technological revolution the T-34 represents echoes through military history as a reminder that wars are won not by the best equipment, but by good enough equipment produced in quantities that overwhelm the enemy's capacity to respond. The German panzer force that invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941 believed it was the most advanced armored force in the world. By December 1941, it knew the truth. The Soviets had built a better tank, built it in greater numbers, and fundamentally changed the mathematics of armored warfare. That realization, more than any single battle or campaign, doomed German ambitions in the East. Comment below, which tank would you rather command in 1941? A German Panzer IV or a Soviet T-34? Let me know why. Subscribe for Part 2, where I reveal how Germany finally caught up to the T-34 with the Panther tank, and why it was already too late.